You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Andrew Hunter Murray. Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Cleveland, Ohio, 2006. After a chance encounter, three people soon find out that life can sometimes thrust us into the public eye, even when taking great measures to avoid it. Cooper Madison was the best pitcher in baseball after being drafted number 1 overall in 1996 from the small Gulf Coast town of Pass Christian, Mississippi. 1 year after announcing his sudden and shocking retirement, he finds himself seeking anonymity in Cleveland, Ohio. Kara Knox is the youngest sibling to 3 older brothers. After a tragic work accident to her closest relative, she has built up a tough exterior as she begins her final year of college at Cleveland State University. Jason Knox, Kara's oldest brother, is the lead detective on Cleveland's Edgewater Park killer case. After months without a suspect, he's feeling the heat from his media-hungry chief. Serendipity intervenes, and all three learn that perception and reality are paths that rarely ever intersect. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Hey folks, you really ought to check out Patricia Gillam's Heroes of Corvus series. Book 1 is called A Superhero's Duty. A fight between a second-generation superhero named Red Bolt and a villain for hire named Icarus goes terribly wrong, resulting in the drowning deaths of 3 innocent civilians and orphaning a 6-year-old boy. Racked with guilt, Red Bolt visits Cameron Wilson at the hospital every night and won't leave the boy's side until he falls asleep. Befriended by a night shift nurse, the man in costume begins to disclose what really happened after the fight and why he feels the death of Cameron's parents and sister fall on his actions. A superhero didn't survive that night, and Cameron and the rest of the city are not out of danger. A Superhero's Duty, Book 1 of the Heroes of Corvus by Patricia Gillam. Get this series now. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have Andrew Hunter Murray on the show with me. He has a phenomenal new book that's been out for a couple of months now. It's called The Last Day, and I'll tell you what, guys, I haven't read a book that felt more prescient than this book in quite a while, and it's about a global cataclysm and some people's response to it, and while it's not anywhere near what we're going through at this present moment, it just this book has brought a strange comfort to me over the last little bit as I've read it. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Hank.
Absolutely. Andrew, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, gosh. I think, well, it's always been the kind of background radiation to my work. And so I feel slightly embarrassed it's taken me quite as long to get around to it as it has done, but I think that might be quite a common feeling. I don't think there's anything unusual about that. There's no concrete memory. I'm so irritated by that. I think probably reading books like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as a boy were so exciting to me that I think I then must have made the connection that this had been produced by a person, and if that person could do it, then I might be able to as well. But there's no concrete memory. I just had a vague impression, much like when you're a tiny child and you watch the Olympics and you think, yeah, I'm sure I'll get there eventually. I just sort of assumed it would happen, and then realized in my late 20s that I actually had to do something about it if I was going to be writing books.
Love that. Were you a bookish kid? Other than Hitchhiker's Guide, were
Extremely. Oh yes.
Yeah. What were some of your go-tos? Were you always a science fiction reader? Did you enjoy fantasy? What sorts of things really grabbed you?
Lots of that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it depends kind of what age we're zeroing in on, but lots of science fiction, lots of fantasy, lots of comedy as well. I was a big rereader. That is something I definitely was as a child. And I don't know why that stopped, but I haven't reread nearly as many books recently. I think there is a slight awareness now that I'm reading against the clock. And
Yes.
you can do a hideous calculation of how many books you can get through in the rest of your life. And it's not as many as it's not a high enough figure to make me feel comfortable. So I'm now only rereading real favorites of mine. But I used to read books 5 or 6 times in a row when I was a child.
I did the same thing, and I think you're right. My to-be read pile gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and as I approach middle age, I start thinking, okay, if I can read 2 books a week, and I'm not comfortable with that math.
I know, it's sort of, and exactly, the to be read pile. I don't think I had one of those when I was a child. I don't think I had one until a few years ago, really. And there is this dread sense of pleasure sliding into obligation. But that's the case with so much of life. So why should reading be any different?
Right. And let's don't even talk about digital books. My Kindle has more books than I'll ever be able to get to, much less the physical books. I'm looking at the bookshelf, which sits right beside my desk, and I just get a sinking feeling when I look over there. So I'm going to look the other way.
There's such a disconnect, isn't there, between the amount of effort it takes to get, let's say, the complete works of Arthur Conan Doyle on your Kindle for free, and the amount of effort it takes to read the complete works of Arthur Conan Doyle. And at least with a physical book, you have to, you used to have to go to an actual shop, and that was a handy barrier, I think, against doing that.
Gluttonous book hoarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something about diminishing returns. I don't know. Do you remember what was the first book that you read? I remember the first time I read Hitchhiker's Guide. That since you mentioned that's just kind of come alive in my mind again. But do you remember the first book that you read that you were just, taken aback that people could do that with words? Like I remember a Sherlock Holmes story, as a matter of fact, that when I got to the end of it, I was like, I can't believe that you can do that with words. Like I just completely took a trip and never left my home. And I feel like the world is bigger now after reading that. Do you remember having that experience?
Yeah, I think I do. And the book was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Casey. And I think my mum gave me the book when I was, I think, too young to appreciate it, or I wasn't an advanced enough reader. And I looked at the first few pages, this kind of crazy stream of consciousness stuff, and I thought, no, it's too far out for me, won't enjoy that, and put it away for a few years. And then I think, embarrassingly, having seen the film of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I went back to the book, and it really, I mean, the film is, wonderful, but the book really, took the roof off my head. I just couldn't believe the fireworks, the verbal fireworks that were going on in there. So I remember the addition really clearly. When you have that sense of strong attachment to a beaten up old paperback.
Sure,
I have that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the film is great, but the book is brilliant.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's head and shoulders above.
Yeah.
So Andrew, what did you as a bookish kid and someone that just kind of had the assumption that that you would be involved in storytelling, writing one day, and various other means. How does a kid pursue that? What was the path that you took that you thought would get you to where you wanted to go?
That I think the very nice way you've put that question presupposes a great deal more nous and intelligence on my part than I actually displayed for many, many years.
As with all of us.
I think I definitely wanted to, I wanted to write, and then I got to university, and I had a vague sense I wanted to write funny. That was the kind of assumption that I've made. And I got to university, and I then started performing improvised comedy. So I really made a switch from the wanting to do the most permanent form of literature, one where you can speak to someone 100 years from now who picks up your book by chance and they read it and they're transported into a world you've made. I went from that to an art form where 5 minutes after leaving, no one remembers what happened. They have a vague impression it was funny. And I had a wonderful time doing that for many years, and still perform occasionally in a group in London. But that was definitely not. It was very helpful in lots of ways because it helped me. Performing like that helps with. It helps you marshal words in a really useful order, and it teaches you a lot about how people respond to jokes. But it is not good for your permanent record, as it were. So. I didn't write any short stories. I didn't write, I kind of left it for a bit. And then I did get jobs as a writer soon after leaving university, which involved turning out, many thousands of words a year. And words I found interesting rather than just having to churn. But yeah, didn't do anything about it until I started writing short stories in about my middle 20s. So yeah, late bloomer.
What was that first writing job that you got?
Well, I got really, really lucky. I got 2 jobs pretty much very soon after leaving university. One of them is as a writer for a British TV show, which is called QI. It's slightly known in the States, but it's a show about everything, really. It's a panel show. You have one host and you have 4 guest comedians every week. And the idea behind the show is that literally everything in the universe is interesting and fascinating if you look at it in the right way or from the right angle or for long enough. And I've been working for them since then because it is effectively you're being paid to read about everything forever. It's a joy. And so that's one job, and then the other one was for a satirical magazine in the UK called Private Eye, which is, and I'm still working there as well. I've advanced very, very little since leaving university. I've been at these 2 places for more than a decade each, and they're both so much fun. They're both so stimulating and interesting that I don't want to leave. So I've had to kind of add extra work, such as a novel, on top. It's the cherry on top of an already very stimulating cake.
Well, you say that you haven't advanced very much. I see digging roots deeper. That means something as well. There's something to finding a place where you fit and you feel like you have a voice, and that your creativity is stimulated and digging in there. I think that's just as important sometimes.
That is a much nicer way of putting it. And I'm going to start saying that instead. Okay.
Yes. Say, I've dug deep roots here. That's that's a better way of saying it. The types of professional writing that you've been doing, and we'll get to the novel here in a few minutes, but I'm intrigued by how this time of kind of on the fly writing and coming up with something new each week for the TV show, and I think you even have a podcast that has spun off of that. Yeah. How has that time and that sort of work fueled you creatively? And as a novelist, can you look back and see that the time that you've spent doing these other creative endeavors, have they fed you as a novelist?
I think so. I think it'd be hard to do the work at QI in particular, which really is, you're reading about every single subject under the sun. It'd be very hard to do that and not be inspired by the strange things you're finding out. So you're just kind of constantly made aware that your imagination can be broadened, I think, by reading about fascinating things. I read something recently about a floating church in a part of England called Norfolk, which used to it was a boat and a church at the same time, and it used to float around this very flat canal-like atmosphere, dispensing holiness essentially to the residents of the marshes. And I'm definitely going to use a floating church somewhere in my writing career from now on. I don't know where or when, but it's constantly presenting you with these wonderful inspirational ideas or concepts or visions. And one of the novel opens with a scene which is inspired by a fact I learned for QI. So it's been hugely instrumental. Yeah.
So as you're working with QI, and then you guys spun off a podcast, right? What is No Such Thing as a Fish?
It is embarrassingly format free. It is a podcast where four of us, there's a core cast of four of us, we all work or have worked for the TV show, and each of us just brings a fact to the table, and each week the four of us will have four facts between us, and we've gone away and done our own work finding things out, and we bring the most hilarious and strange facts about it. And we just talk about them, and we try and make each other laugh, and we hope the listeners are laughing along at home. So my fact this week, as an example, I spent the afternoon researching this, is that ants have a special stomach, which is just to contain food to throw up into the mouths of other ants. Isn't that
that's amazing.
I never knew that. Yeah. And this is how they communicate with each other, and they this is yet again. I often think when reading about animals how lucky we are not to be these animals, because this just feels like a terrible way of communicating.
Well, and with people, there are some people who would say that their love language is food. They like to cook for other people. They like to share meals with people. That takes it to a whole other level.
It absolutely does. Yeah. And so that'll be one of the facts for the week, and then we'll spend a while talking about that and cracking silly jokes, and then we move on to the next one. But we've done about 6 years, once a week now, so we feel quite well established, and we've been traveling around. We've been touring the world. We came to the States for the first time last year, very exciting, and had a wonderful time doing shows there. So yeah, that is expanding and expanding all the time, and presenting you with new weirdness.
Right. And you guys have published a couple of books along the way, themed. What brought about the books?
We had a TV show that got cancelled. That's what brought about the books, as far as I recall. We did a couple of seasons of this really fun show called. So the podcast is No Such Thing as a Fish, and the TV show is No Such Thing as the News. And the idea is very simple. Each week we find four things that are topical, four amazing, strange things happening right now around the world, and we talk about them. And the show ran for 2 seasons, and it was great fun. And then the BBC decided not to go for a 3rd season. I can't comment on the wisdom or otherwise of that decision, but it did leave us with free time on our hands, which we then the next year put into writing as we titled it The Book of the Year 2017. See, clever thing with that title,
right.
If people Google the Book of the Year, well, they'll get us. And that was a compendium of all the weirdest and most miraculous stuff happening around the world, slightly as a corrective to the doom and gloom that pervades so much news. We're constantly finding out about the worst things that are happening around the world, and this was an attempt to slightly broaden the horizons and say, while bad things are happening all around the world, there are some magnificent and strange and funny things happening too.
But it seems to me that your life and your work has been filled and informed with a lot of silliness over the last few years, yeah. Which I love, because just like you said, we can. We're all going through something right now, as as we're recording this. I think everyone is relating to what we're talking about, but we find ourselves, looking for comedy movies, and we're looking for uplifting, lighthearted things to read, because the world is just too intense right now. So we're looking for an escape, and I fully appreciate the silliness, that you do in your work and what you bring to the world. But what kind of reawakened your sci-fi nerd inner self, because you have serious sci-fi cred, but you've kind of been in the comedy world. How do you start to find your science fiction voice, and what brought about the desire to write The Last Day?
Well, it's a very strange thing. I should quickly say just the basic idea behind it, because that'll help explaining the how I came to it. So the Last Day is it's a novel set in a world whose rotation has ground to a halt. So it's several decades from now. Half the world now faces in towards the sun permanently, and the other half of the planet is facing out towards the cold, frozen universe. Those barriers have been established in perpetuity, and the book happens in that world. There's a narrow ring, basically, of the sunlit side where life and civilization survive. So anyway, that's the idea behind it.
But before you go any further, let me stop you for just a second, because I'm reading the book, and the first thing I think of is, how did Andrew come up with the premise for this? Like, who thinks about what would happen if the world just stopped spinning? And then I'm thinking, because I'm thinking about what I'll talk about with you, and maybe directions that I want to steer the conversation, or just thoughts that I'm having before I do a show. And one thought is, well, how do you start? You come up with a premise, and then how do you start taking all of the effects out to their end? And how do you do research for that? Well, now that I've gotten to know you a little bit, this is what you do every day, isn't it? Look for weird facts and then figure out, well, what would happen if? So this is not outside of your wheelhouse at all, is it?
Not really. I guess I didn't realize that I was laying the groundwork for this kind of novel. And as I slightly mentioned before, I always assumed that what I wrote would be lighthearted, would be funny, would be in the vein of P.G. Wodehouse or Terry Pratchett or any of these brilliant comic authors. I had assumed that. And then I have a very clear memory of when the idea came to me for The Last Day. I was walking along. I'd been visiting some family in South London, and I can't do it without resorting to cliche, but out of the blue, the image, a single image of the world hanging in space, caught between light and darkness, just appeared in my head. And the first thought I had was, what would happen? So, assuming this could ever happen, what would happen next? What happens to geography? What happens to politics? What happens to the relations between different countries? And I had a notebook on me, and I went to a cafe nearby, and I just started writing. I started imagining the answers to all of those questions, and I spent about 6 months just writing this world before I got anywhere near a plot. Before any characters turned up and introduced themselves, I just wanted to know what would happen. What would this be like? And I had assumed I would write something funny. It's not a comic novel, and I just knew as soon as I had the idea, oh, this is what I'm going to write, because I can't resist it.
Right. So you start with the premise and the idea and what would happen if, and then you said, you started working through those things before any character showed up. When did the character of Ellen Hopper show up in your kind of imagining of this?
She arrived. I think she was one of the first when I started thinking. Right, now I know this world. What is happening in it? I did actually know the big central secret of the story almost from the beginning, but it took me a long while to sort of circle back around to it. Ellen Hopper, who's the main character, she's a British oceanographer, and she lives on this half mothballed converted oil rig in the middle of the frosty North Atlantic. She just kind of arrived as well. I had some sort of planning sessions where it's very weird trying to create people. Never having done it to any extent before. I've never written a novel length version of a character, but she was. The sensation was of just someone walking up to you and introducing themselves. There wasn't much. I don't feel I had much to do with Ellen Hopper arriving on the scene, if I can put it that way.
So the Earth has stopped spinning in the book, and there are there are consequences to that. We take for granted that sunsets happen, sunrises each and every day. We set our clocks by it, so to speak, and all of society kind of is informed and is set by these daily occurrences. So what happens when that stops? How did you decide on a cataclysm that would set the events into motion?
Do you mean the mechanism by which it happens?
Yes. Like you come with the idea, what would happen if the Earth stopped spinning?
Yeah.
So then, how do you come up with a believable way? And what was the research like? Because inevitably when you start asking these questions, do you start Googling? What would happen if if the Earth stayed in one spot? How do you, as a researcher, start digging through all of the possibilities?
Well, the thing is, it's very strange because I started research exactly. I mean, you start like any journey today. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with Google.
Right.
So I started looking into the Earth slowing down. I remembered reading somewhere that the Earth's rotation is actually slowing down, but it's by a fraction of a second per century. But that is currently happening. So I knew I just had to expedite that process that's already going on. And I thought of a few potential methods. I wasn't sure they were right. And then I turned to a friend of mine who is an astrophysicist, and she's studying at Oxford for a PhD in astrophysics. And I said, look, I've had this idea. Can it be done? And if so, how? And she very kindly went and spoke to her colleagues. More astrophysics dons sort of pitched in their ideas, and she sent back this extraordinary, like a buffet of options of how to lasso a planet to a halt. So I got very, very fortunate there. And there are all kinds of mechanisms by which it could happen. And we have seen, this is the wonderful thing, there are planets out there which are, as we call it, tidally locked with the stars they're orbiting. So the moon is tidally locked with the Earth, which is why we only ever really see one face of it. And there are planets out there where one side is boiling and the other is frozen. So they do exist, which was really cheering when I found that out. I thought, right, this is not, you want the audience to suspend their disbelief to a certain extent, but you also want to put the spade work in to make sure that what you're describing is credible.
Right.
Yeah.
The the physical world calamity that the characters are experiencing is bad enough. And then you introduce this idea that there's, that there's a conspiracy afoot, and that, we're dealing with totalitarian regimes and things that are very familiar in a lot of science fiction. Why did you decide? What was going on in the world? Maybe that triggered this. Was this a response to certain fears and anxieties that you were experiencing about the way the world was going?
Definitely. I think it was Ursula K. Le Guin, the brilliant science fiction author. She said that science fiction doesn't describe the future; it describes the present. And I really loved that idea when I read it. And I think that's definitely what a lot of science fiction writers are trying to do. They're trying to show us our own world with slightly fresh eyes. And there is lots that happens in the novel which is analogous to what we're dealing with now as a planet. To put it crudely, it's set on a planet where the climate has changed dramatically, where people are moving across the planet in order to survive and to keep their families alive, and where countries are withdrawing from each other in an atmosphere of fear and hostility and suspicion. So this is another way of looking at all the things that are happening in the world today, but it's a way of removing oneself from them as well. So you don't have to. You and the reader are not saying to each other, this is a clear allegory for this, and this shows us the author's opinions about this, because I'm quite keen to avoid that kind of thing. So it is in a parallel state that you're writing, but you have no choice but to reflect the world that you're living in, because the novel is a product of the world that the author is living in, whatever that may be.
Right. At what point in the the imagination state of this book, when in the beginning, before it's a book and it's a story that's just forming, but you start to kind of get your hands around it, and before you can sit down and really start the book, a lot of people have some pretty firm ideas about where the story's going, and character development and things like that. At what point in that did you realize that this was not going to be a book of wry humor, that this was going to be more of a science fiction tale, and maybe that this is there's something that I want to say here, and did you wrestle with that at all, because you've worked for quite a while in this other medium, and were you scared about switching gears?
Strangely, I didn't. I don't remember being scared of switching gears, because there's always been this side of me that's very interested in, these writers and these thinkers who've been coming up with these strange other worlds and stepping into them. That sounds very confident, and it's very easy to say that after finishing a book. I had no doubt at all.
Sure.
And any author who says that is lying, because you do not know what you've got until you finish doing it. But I did feel, it's hard to describe. I felt like I was being led by the idea, and there's that strange sensation that you've got of, well, I suppose I've had the idea, but it's now my job to follow it, acting as a kind of secretary for it, clearing its path into the world. That there's no way of describing it without sounding a bit doolally, but that is how it feels. You think the idea is lurking somewhere within the block of marble, and you've just got to hope that your chisel is good enough to get at the right expression of it.
Sure. There's some heavy stuff that happens in the book, but
I know, so grim. I didn't mean to do. I reread one of the early drafts and I thought, Mike, this is heavy.
Well, it is, but there are also moments of levity throughout the book where you let us, as the reader, off the hook for a moment, if you will, where it's just not it's not constant. Dreadfulness. We get to feel the full range of emotions with the characters, because everything can't be bad 24/7. There are moments of levity, even in the worst of things, even if it's gallows humor, it's still humor. Was that a conscious effort on your part to, this is getting a little intense here. Let me insert something, or is that just kind of the natural response to how you handle stress and calamity?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, that is definitely how I respond to things. But I think the other thing is that no matter what happens, no matter what difficult turns society or the world take, the human sense of humor survives. I mean, there are funny people who are, observing the ironies of their situation, even in the very worst circumstances. And so I think it was important to me that I was writing characters who were human beings. That is a key function of being a human being, is to notice the world around you and to notice the funny things about it, even though there is a lot of serious stuff going on. So I was definitely trying to do that. But that is part of, I think, writing a decent character is thinking of how they find things funny, whether they do. Maybe they're one of the very rare people who don't find anything funny, but that's a really big and conscious choice to make, I think.
When you're when you first started thinking about the world, and when it stopped spinning, half of the world is going to be in constant daylight, half is going to be in shade, and that's going to cause all sorts of things. Half the planet's going to die, in essence, going to be frozen. How did you choose where to focus the story, and who got to be on the good side?
Well, yeah, gosh, the good side. Yeah, I mean,
there's no real good side, but
absolutely, yeah. But you're right. There are less awful bits.
Right.
Well, so the bulk of the action takes place in the United Kingdom, which, because I'm born and grown up here, is the place that I felt I could describe most accurately and most. I felt like I was already biting off quite a lot by slowing the planet to a halt. So I thought, for your setting, actually, I'm not going to set it in the middle of Melbourne, for example. I'm going to, it's going to be set in the UK. However, there is quite a transatlantic feel to the whole thing, because a lot of the book deals with relations between Britain and the USA, and how the world's only superpower will have responded to this, completely altering threat. And what, that's another big theme of the book, is what countries will do to survive under, when faced with potentially civilization-ending threats.
When, in The Last Day, they are obviously dealing with a very a very different threat than what we're going through in the real world right now with the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic. But this time has made a lot of people sit and think about, the way things are going and how we respond to things. And there are a lot of watchdog groups that are raising some maybe not fears, but raising awareness for when we're going through something like this, we are very prone and susceptible to give away our liberties in exchange for being safe. And there's a lot of talk about that right now, especially in America where I am. Over this past weekend, we had some churches that had some clashes with law enforcement because people were wanting, we want people to stay home and quarantine, and other people were, wanting to exercise their liberties, and those things, come face to face sometimes. And we read a book like The Last Day, and we get to see what could possibly happen if the situation were worse and maybe a little further down the road into the future. Why are books like this important in times of reflection, and what can we learn, not just from your book, but from science fiction in general, and these types of stories that take us out to the possibilities of what can happen to society? Why is literature like this important for us as people?
Oh gosh, what a question!
I know that's a rambling question. I'm sorry.
No. It was a great question. It's such a biggie. I think that any books which expand our internal range of possibilities about what could happen, the kind of world we could create for ourselves, are beneficial. Even if those worlds never come about, even if they're warnings against the world going in a particular direction, I think they have value. It's as I'm kind of reluctant to put to quantify it and put a social value on it, because I also think that novels have to be exercises in imagination and creativity and escapism. So I don't want to deny that function of it. But one good example is what Margaret Atwood said about The Handmaid's Tale. She said that every single example of misogyny, structured state misogyny, that she describes in the book, all of that is real somewhere in the world today. Her combination of the ingredients is different and unusual, but in a sense, what she's writing about is real, because that's where she's taken it from. So I think books about these unsettled, uncertain, difficult times are important, because if you like, they're controlled experiments and visions of what we could have, and that I hope might make people reflect on what we have now.
I think it's I think that's very well put. The book is called The Last Day. It's available everywhere now. I would highly recommend the audiobook of this, especially if your favorite bookstore is closed down right now. Grab the audiobook, and all the money that you're saving in gasoline because you're not driving anywhere. When the bookstores open back up, go down and grab the hardcover of this for your bookshelf. But it's available in Kindle edition, audiobook edition, and hardback. Andrew, this book is so much fun. I hope that we didn't paint it in too dark a light, because it really is a fun adventure science fiction book, and it makes you think about a lot of possibilities, and I love it so much. If people are just learning about you, is there a place where they can connect with you online?
I think the only place they can do it is via my Twitter feed, where I'm at Andrew Hunter M.
Okay, we'll link that up in the show notes where they can find you on Twitter and follow you there, and there are links to the book as well. Andrew, this has been so much fun talking. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much, Hank.